Next up, we have Carissa Christensen from Bryce Tech. Are you there, Carissa?
I am here. Thank you so
Lovely.
much.
Over to you.
I'm going to share my screen and talk a bit about space manufacturing. I'm so delighted to follow Frank, who talked about the surge of investment into space, and Michael, who talked about the importance of having an end customer. And in fact, at Bryce Tech, we tend to think of space activities in two groupings that are very helpful in thinking about those kinds of topics. One is the satellite value chain, and that's pretty much a digital business with a large commercial component, as well as, of course, government customers. And then all other activity, in-space activity, separate from the satellite value chain, which tends to Michael's point, tends to have an end customer that is government. That's a very useful construct. I thought what I would do today is talk a little bit very specifically about in-space manufacturing and the companies that are doing it, the funding that they're relying on, and what some of the challenges that they face in scaling up those businesses. We've done a few studies recently that I thought you would be interested in seeing some results from. So thinking about manufacturing in space, this is producing products, either doing experiments and research in space with the goal of manufacturing, either in space or improving terrestrial manufacturing. We're seeing more and more companies assess the viability. There's a great deal of interest. The ISS is, of course, the nexus for that activity. We've seen in-space production payloads flown nearly 20, a dozen facilities in space, multiple ISS implementation partners, i.e. companies that operate on the International Space Station, and at least 3 are directly supporting manufacturing investigations. And NASA and ISS partners are actively promoting the idea of sustainable, scalable, and profitable demand for LEO manufacturing services. And success at scale requires a combination of technology, which we think about a lot, logistics, which I think we need to think about a bit more, and absolutely the fundamental, most important feature of a successful business case is a customer willing to pay a price that closes the business case. So I think that this is a quite interesting slide in that this is a list of some, certainly not all, manufacturing-oriented projects that are focused on improving manufacturing on Earth by using the space environment to learn more. And the products to which this applies range from beer to faucets to supercomputing to household cleaners to tires to, you'll forgive me, footballs, cancer medications, growing cotton. In addition to innovative startups, some major global corporations are using space, the space environment to learn more about their core businesses. And I think that is not, so the idea of using space to improve tire performance terrestrially is maybe not always aligned in our vision of the future of in-space manufacturing and the use of space resources. I think that it's really important, again, to sort of agree with Michael's point, to think very pragmatically about demand and customer base. And there is a much larger terrestrial customer base than there is an in-space customer base. And so this kind of activity is important for building the ecosystem. There are also any number of research projects seeking to focus on manufacturing in space as opposed to researching in space and applying that to terrestrial manufacturing. A number of contracts recently awarded by NASA to companies that have raised other funds as well. but those government awards have enabled them to do initial demonstration projects, to develop fiber optic cable, Z-band artificial retinas, accelerate stem cells, and so on. And this is not a one and done process. As you can see, there are multiple missions, multiple steps in the learning process, moving toward a business that's viable and then can potentially scale with a lot of mortality in that process, as is the case for R&D businesses generally. Just to look a little bit more deeply at why use the microgravity environment? These are 4 product areas. Again, this is by no means an exhaustive list, but we've heard a good bit about exotic fiber optics and that as a potential in-space market. There are some challenges in terms of manufacturing long strands of exotic material, but certainly short pieces are very relevant in terrestrial niche markets. And the microgravity environment reduces impurities in the production of that fiber optic cable. Looking at high quality machine parts, you can create stronger materials. Thin film products, artificial retinas are really interesting and attractive product because they're so small. The cost of producing them in space may be comparable or even less than producing them terrestrially. And there is a clear existing market for such a product. And then bioprinted materials, the idea of printing tissues in space, and essentially microgravity prevents those products from collapsing in on themselves as they're produced. And so those are the kinds of benefits of the space environment that companies are seeking to exploit. What are some of the challenges that they're facing in doing so? And this is, I think, a very interesting framing of those logistics challenges in particular. In the short term, looking at, so across all the time frames, short term, medium term, long term, in the life of a business, transportation is a challenge. In the very near term, limited access slows innovation. For example, biological research requires more cold stowage and power. In the midterm, we just may not have a sufficient cargo cadence for scaled up demand if multiple companies succeed. And so this is one of the real challenges of thinking about the future of space resources is the cost of designing for success, given that the success of multiple actors is certainly not guaranteed, and there's a non-zero probability that that level will not of demand will not transpire, or taking the risk of not planning for that success and then underperforming when finally some of these long-standing investments come to fruition. And then in the long term, certainly the questions around a post-space station system, the roles and responsibilities of government agencies, the likely availability of commercial capability and potential subsidies for transportation to platforms also are relevant to thinking about long-term business outcomes. Crew time in the near term, lack of crew time, crews are typically overworked, can make it difficult to troubleshoot or iterate on a research project on the space station. And in the long term, the question of, again, what will commercial or new platforms do with regard to making crew time available and making subsidized crew time available, and how will government agencies engage with those commercial platforms to make that feasible. Financing in the near term, government funding for demonstrations has proven to be very important in attracting private financing. In the long term, and both of our previous speakers were quite eloquent about this, the time frame in which space businesses, particularly large-scale space businesses, in which they're likely to see returns to ramp up is typically longer than many types of capital are comfortable with. Regulation will be an increasingly relevant part of business in space. For example, in the near term, as we're looking at biological products, those manufacturers are going to need to satisfy regulators that regulate drugs and medical products. And those regulatory agencies, even if they are very much aligned with the goals of being responsive, are absolutely not set up to handle regulating and overseeing activities that occur in space, and so will likely require new kinds of cooperation with space agencies. And that regulatory scrutiny is likely to get more strict as we're looking at complex biological products, such as even 3D printed organs or tissues or organs. Safety practices, this is quite an interesting one. I don't think there's any suggestion that safety practices should be abandoned, but that the safety practices that currently exist are more designed for one-off single activities, as opposed to repeatable at scale to allow for a certification type approach. And so again, in the event of success, addressing those safety practices is going to be important to enable scaling. And finally, platform uncertainty. I spoke about this a bit earlier. The evolution of the International Space Station into its next iteration, whether that is an entirely commercial platform, a hybrid platform, what international partnerships are involved there, what's the relationship between industry and government, what's the time frame, what is the risk of a gap in capability. Those kinds of considerations become more and more important as companies move closer to, move away from an experimental exploratory mode and into a mode where they're seeking to manufacture at scale. So those were just a few of the points that I wanted to touch on. I very much appreciate the opportunity to speak with you here today, and my main regret is that I'm not there in Luxembourg, which I have always enjoyed in the past, and I look forward to an opportunity very soon to be in that extraordinarily vibrant community.
Carissa, thank you for bringing your lovely vibrancy to us in Luxembourg, and we too look forward to seeing you hopefully next time. Thank you for the detailed slides and all of the information there on what is a really important aspect of Space Resources Week.